you join the voyageur express brigades in the fur trade, and you're paddling from the Hudson Bay to the Oregon coast and back.
You're paddling 18 hours a day. You get up 1 a.m.
Yep.
You smoke a lot. You drink a lot.
You sing a lot.
You sing a lot.
You don't live to be very old.
You get hernias.
You get hernias. You get eaten by bugs. You get shot at. Grizzly bears. There's no life jackets.
Welcome to the Wilderness Wavelength Podcast.
Welcome to it. This is another episode of the Wilderness Wavelength Podcast. My name is George. Co-host Scott Sunderwald on the show.
Right on. Officially a co-host.
Officially
Holy
a
smokes.
co-host, yeah.
Do I get a t-shirt or something?
We do got to get some swag. I was thinking about that. I got to get some Wilderness Wavelength swag.
Nice.
This episode, happy to feature Margaret from the museum.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Margaret. Margaret, you're the Operations Program Manager at the Northern Rockies Museum of Culture and Heritage in Hinton.
That's right.
How long have you been doing that for?
3 years, which has gone by very quickly.
Yeah. Where are you from originally?
I grew up on a farm near Edmonton.
Okay.
And I did my schooling in Edmonton and Ontario and then got this job.
Cool. We just got, I know they have like lots of cool, we'll dig into some of the stuff happening at the museum. You guys are going to put on a birthday party for my boy coming up here soon.
You bet.
With like some like some kind of horse thing.
Not real horses.
That was his big question. He's like, is there real horses?
I don't have a real horse, I'm sorry.
I don't think there's a horse down there.
But I do fun games.
Yeah.
It's a nice place.
That's a cool option to have. We were like, okay, what should we do for a birthday for a 4-year-old? And like, well, we could have 10 wild kids over here. Or take them somewhere at the museum.
Take them to me.
Yeah, get Margaret to do something with them. So that's awesome. Scott, Northern Rockies Bushcraft on Instagram. You can follow along with Scott. Scott, you said you're building a bow right now too.
Yeah, I'm working on a pretty sweet U-bow from Pacific U. Got my hands on a big chunk. A good friend was able to secure that for me, and it's been sitting in the basement for a few years. You got to let the wood season. And it's tricky to work with. There's lots of knots and that, but this thing is turning out really, really nice. So hopefully, my dream is to use a handmade bow, and I've made many, with stone points and hunt big game with that. Wow. I think that would be the ultimate. You know, you make your arrows, fletch the feathers and everything from scratch, and take some big game. I'll probably start with some snowshoe hares here in a few weeks.
Yeah,
and just get practiced up.
Cool. So Margaret, we're going to dig into some of the things happening at the museum. What do you guys got going on there right now?
Well, we have our usual exhibits up. I'm packing up a traveling exhibit this week, and then we're going to relaunch our Indigenous plants exhibit. We had it up last year, but we have some pressed plant samples that a local artist is framing. So it's going to look really good. And then we have our usual exhibits. We have a new Cold War theme exhibit downstairs and a traveling photo exhibit coming in April. So lots of little things. And then we're just there, open, happy to meet visitors and have things for people of all sizes and ages.
What kind of schooling do you do to get into the museum business?
People do all kinds of stuff, especially small museums. Like I've met people at museums conferences with agriculture degrees or paralegal certificates, because a lot of the time a small museum just needs somebody who knows and cares about the area. Okay. I have a master's in public history. The catchphrase for that is public history is putting history to work, making it useful. So it's really wide ranging for anything from writing policy to working in museums and archives. You can also take museum studies, history, cultural resource management, tourism, and then you kind of find your way from there. And it depends if you want to be in a big museum and just do one little thing, or my job is a ton of management and just trying to pull all the pieces together more than it is historical research right now. Yeah. So the short answer is there's a lot of ways to get into museums. The main thing is to have a lot of energy and care about the community you're in.
So with the master's program, was that sort of an end goal in mind? This is where you wanted to end up working with museums, or did it just kind of unfold that way?
It's kind of funny. It's kind of circular, because both are true. It unfolded and I had an end goal. When I was in undergrad and people kept asking me, what are you going to do with a history degree? Because that's always what people asked you. Right. The catchphrase I came up with was, I might work in a museum and work with kids, because I like working with kids. I was a swimming instructor for my very first job. And so that was kind of the party line, but I also had an open mind because a history degree is a lot just about communications and learning, and people with history degrees work in all kinds of fields. Like an informal stat is that almost half or more than half of Canada's civil service has a history degree.
Wow.
Like we're just in charge. So you can do a lot with a history degree, and I knew that. I took the public history program because it seemed really interesting. It only took a year. Didn't have to write a thesis. Got to take a lot of cool courses.
Cool.
And also kept the options open. And then I found that working in just pure research got a little bit isolating. So then I wound up at a museum doing a lot of work with kids. So here we are.
Awesome. Yeah.
Did you do a lot of research on like the specific history of Hinton before you came out here then?
No, I did not.
So you're like kind of learning as you're going along?
Yeah, I am. I did a lot of Western Canadian history in my first degree, my undergrad, because I got hooked on it. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And I did do a course on the history of the Canadian Rockies. They ran it for the first time in my final year. Oh, it was so great.
Huh.
So that was actually something I did have. But other than that, I read a lot of books in my first year here, and now I try and do one a year and keep my interest going. And then I try and read farther in Canadian history as well, because it's all connected. There's always something new to learn, and it all seems to come back together.
I might be wrong about this, but when I was younger, history always seemed dull and boring, and for people in university, behind books. And nowadays, it seems like there's a real love for history. Like there's podcasts. I know my sons, they're in their 20s. They listen to this stuff. The history's like the thing, right? Everybody's listening to history of the pirates, history of, the wars and the battles, world wars. And I think the documentary series on Netflix and different podcasts have really brought history to life. And it's not sort of what I would say sort of a fringe academic thing like it used to be. Now, is that just me, or have you noticed that same trend?
Oh, well, I wasn't around 50 years ago. I know that that's a stereotype, and it is quite possible that the way it was taught was a lot about memorization, a lot about dates, a lot about timelines. I think the amazing stories have always been there and maybe popped out in different ways, like maybe more in everyday storytelling or even in the memories, because, there's elderly people in our town who remember the explorers and the outfitters from 3 generations before that.
Yeah.
So we live in a generation where the kind of romantic pre-electricity era is long gone. We're very entertainment focused, and so it comes together to history gets packaged in this way that really does justice to how incredibly exciting and interesting all these stories are. I fight for Canadian history. I feel like it still has the reputation of being stuffy and boring, but maybe it'll have its day in the sun.
I think it will, yeah. Well, we had Monty Grote here a few weeks ago, and here's this young guy in his 20s. Of course, as you say, the Grote family is an example of a family that dates back to the fur trade and even pre-fur trade. In the area here, guiding, outfitting, hunting, and it's really amazing to live in the Northern Rockies here, where you bump into these families. The Grotes are just one example of many, sort of these living legacies of families that are here.
I noticed that when I moved here. All my knowledge and work with history here is academic. That's the take I can put on it because I'm an outsider and I have academic training. And I think it's amazing that we live in this area where, the people's roots run so deep and the stories are alive because people remember the people who experienced the things that created the area and created the way Canada's put together around here.
Yeah, absolutely.
What books do you recommend for people?
Well, there's a lot. My favorite, so this is personal opinion, but my favorite Canadian history book I've read recently is called History of Canada in 10 Maps. I brought it.
Perfect.
History of Canada in 10 Maps. It's by Adam Schultz,
Oh, yeah, he's
who's
the
not
canoe-
related to me.
Yeah, he's the canoe excursionist.
He's the canoe excursionist, and he's written a lot about his canoe excursions, but he wrote this one book,
cool.
Walking Through Canada's History Pre-Confederation, in 10 great maps, from a Viking map that shows the end of Newfoundland. David Thompson's map is in there, and it ends with a map of the War of 1812. And the way it's written is just so engaging. I had a friend read it and then tell me that if she went back to school, she'd do her master's in Canadian history. And I said, well, mission accomplished. So I think it was, really interesting take on it and a really engaging way to see how exciting Canadian history is.
Yeah.
And it has a David Thompson chapter, so it even takes you through our area.
Awesome.
What's the other books you brought here? You brought a couple more. Curious now.
Well, you had mentioned David Thompson when we talked about this, so I brought Epic Wanderer, which is a biography of David Thompson.
Okay. Yeah.
It's pretty good. Not my favorite, not personally, but I think the guy did a pretty good job of trying to bring David Thompson to life.
Yeah.
As someone who did a lot of history school, sometimes this guy speculates about how David Thompson might have felt, and then that makes me mad because it's not proven. But that's my only complaint with the book. And then I brought this one called Culturing Wilderness in Jasper, which is a collection of articles that I got to use for that course I took in university. And it's really good. It's got an article about the fur trade in our area, and then taking you through like the formation of the national park, which is
cool.
Not straightforward. It was small, and then it was big, and then it was small again. So
it also deals quite a bit with indigenous use of fire, if I recall.
There's an article
fire
about
on the landscape.
Fire control. There's an interview with Ed Moberly, who was a child when the Moberlys were evicted from Jasper, and then went back to work there as a guide and was interviewed as an elderly man. So it's a good collection. I think the library in town has it. We have it at the museum, and it's available through University of Alberta Press, I think. It's a bit more of a serious book, but it's very nice.
Cool. And Scott, you're pretty excited about this book too. Margaret said this is a hard one to get.
Yeah. I've got a book that I brought here called A Hard Road to Travel, and it was made by Peter Murphy, Bob Udell, Stevenson, and the very famous late great Tom Peterson, who used to be in the area. I did some historical tours with him, and it's sad, we've lost a lot of these local historians, but they wrote this fantastic book, A Hard Road to Travel. I don't know if you can even get it in print anymore, but it does a great job of kind of painting a picture of the earliest years of the Northern Rockies here.
Yeah.
Yeah, rough area, hence the title, right? You think how we drive through the Rockies in a car and we don't think anything of it.
Easy breezy,
yeah. But imagine what it was like with the bogs and the mountains and, dynamiting rocks and fjording rivers and just crazy. And then the weather on top of that.
Yeah.
Mosquitoes, bears. I mean, this is a rough country, even with the modern day roads, right?
Are we digging into the history of Hinton on this episode? Are we going to dip our toes in that a little bit?
I think we could dip our toes a little bit. I've got a bit of a timeline here I thought might be kind of fun for our listeners, and we've got Margaret here who can fill in any blanks, and maybe we can springboard off of some of this. I'm a bit of an amateur historian, not an expert by any means, but I've been in the area for 20 years. And it's really quite amazing. I have a real love for pre-contact, maybe because I love Stone Age stuff and flint knapping myself and making bows and things and atlatls. And so the earliest sign of humans on the land here was 10,000 to 12,000 years ago.
Wow.
Now, it may have been longer. That's just what archaeologists have found. And that's right when the glaciers were receding. So if you're familiar with the mountainscapes here and the lakes, the Cayman Kettle topography, we call that, all of that was carved out by glaciers that were up to a kilometer thick across the land. So these things were just receding as people were coming in the area. And to give you a sense of timeline, that was long before the bow and arrow was used on this continent.
Yeah.
So people were using hand-thrown spears and atlatls, which are spear throwers, and they were going for megafauna like bison, moose, caribou were really big in the area. And if you go back far enough, of course, mammoths, woolly mammoths were here. Camels, too. The American lion, depends how far back you go in the history. So that just, I can lie awake at night just trying to ponder what that would have been like to live here at that time. Would have been amazing.
Is that like a museum exhibit you guys would do, like something that like 10,000 years ago?
Yeah, nothing's impossible. Let me think.
Like I want to see a woolly mammoth at the museum.
Yeah, me too. Badly. One problem with that is the artifacts are valuable. And are they going to give them to me? Maybe not. I would take good care of them. But huge museums with hugely valuable artifacts might not feel that way.
Yeah.
Also, you have to pay for that kind of stuff. Also, the other challenge with making an exhibit about that is how sparse the knowledge is, right? It's just archaeological record.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing's impossible. It's not really my wheelhouse. I'll have to think about that while I'm lying awake.
Yeah, cool. You know, and then in the timeline, you go from the First Peoples to a dozen or more indigenous tribes that kind of converged on this area. And because of the Rocky Mountain kind of being this spine through North America, it became a logical dividing line for many tribes to converge. And some of that was friendly trade for sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, you had obsidian being traded, salt, furs, all sorts of things for thousands of years. I mean, I know people have gone in the Wilmore, archaeologists, and found chunks of obsidian which would have come from Yellowstone or Knife River flint from the Dakotas. And that just blows my mind that these trade routes were open for thousands of years, like 10,000 years. And but of course, it was also a place of friction, right? Because you had different tribes vying for land that they could hunt on or fish on. And so there were a lot of battles here as well for resources. So, and then, you know, we look at things like David Thompson, which we talked about. And from what I understand, he came first in 1810, December of 1810. And then really the Athabasca Pass didn't really open up till 1811. Do I have that correct? I think.
Well, he came in December 1810, so 1811 was just around the corner.
Just around the corner, yeah.
Yeah, from my understanding, his company, the Northwest Company, sent him here to map over the Rockies, find a way to go over the Rockies. And there was this rigmarole with, he had originally, several years before, gone over the Rockies at House Pass, straight west from Rocky Mountain House.
Right.
But series of events with like local politics sent him up here. And so he went over in December 1810, January 1811, and made the West Coast in the spring.
Right.
And then that pass was on the map to be used sporadically as a way to get people and goods across the mountains.
Yeah, and for folks who are listening here who may be from the States, everyone knows about Lewis and Clark, and Americans are very proud of Lewis and Clark. But when you look at the achievements of Lewis and Clark compared to David Thompson, it's like they're not even in the same wheelhouse. Like David Thompson, the amount of land that this guy mapped with in tremendous accuracy is just mind-blowing. And for much of it, he took his wife, Charlotte. They had 4 children, as far as I know. And they
had 13 children.
Oh, okay. Well, I stopped reading.
They were on number 5 when they left the West and moved to Montreal. So you are correct.
I think when he came to the Hinton area, he had 4 and left them in Fort Edmonton. That's probably what I'm thinking of.
At that point, it was like too many babies. Maybe Charlotte was pregnant again or something.
Yeah.
They were staying probably with family somewhere in Alberta, Saskatchewan.
And I think the unsung hero, well, there are probably many, but of the Athabasca Pass was the First Nations guide that came from Eastern Canada, right? From Iroquois indigenous tribe, and knew the way over the Rockies to the Pacific coast. Now, if that doesn't blow your mind, like I have modern day maps, GPS, I've flown in airplanes, I've hiked the backcountry. I don't know the damn pass.
Yeah.
And yet this guy from way across the country knew the way to the Pacific coast. So that to me has always been an example of the incredible knowledge of the indigenous people of that time of the land, which is mind-boggling. David Thompson actually set up his first camp close to Brule Lake, maybe even Jokum Valley.
Okay, cool.
And they were hunting bison. They killed 15 for meat. Again, there was no grocery store. There was no cattle or anything, so you kind of had to hunt your way along. These people are shooting buzzards and owls and coyotes, whatever they can get their hands on.
They got really hungry. I think I was rereading it last night. And the other thing is the appetites of the voyageurs, or the people he was traveling with. Like, these guys wanted to eat 8 pounds of meat a day. They were very, very hungry. They didn't always get that. But yeah, the hunting as you go and doing what you can to stay alive was very much a feature of that trip.
And fat, right? Because you can eat rabbits till the cows come home, but you'll slowly starve to death without the fat reserves. So yeah, the bison would have been huge.
David Thompson just mapping, is that what he was doing? Or is he like trying to set up the fur trade? Like, is that part of that, or?
He's a fur trader. This biography does a good job of talking about it. He learned map making. He was an indentured servant with the Hudson's Bay Company when he was a teenager, and he broke his leg the winter he was about 17.
Okay.
And that's when he learned how to survey, because he's this kid lying around the fur trade post with nothing to do, and he was smart and curious. And then when he finished his contract, instead of getting the usual set of clothes that people got, he asked for a set of map making equipment and then built his career on that. He jumped from the Hudson's Bay Company to the Northwest Company because they were more exploring focused. And so that was his trade. But as he went, he sets up posts. He does trading. You know, after he makes it over Athabasca Pass, he spends the rest of the year in what's now British Columbia, you know, setting up for trade networks before he comes back. So he's definitely more than a map maker. He's a fur trader and an entrepreneur and an explorer.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know he was an indentured servant.
Well, that was how the contracts worked.
Yeah,
5-year contract. And if it's a 14-year-old getting contracted for 5 years to go across the ocean and never come back, I'd call that an indentured servant.
Yeah, that's right.
One way of putting it.
Jeez, one step away from slavery, I think. Holy. And then the Athabasca Pass was used from, as far as I know, from 1811 to 1853. It was kind of a major trade route, again, from the Hudson Bay, which people know in close to Manitoba there, all the way to the Oregon coast on the Columbia River. So imagine doing that trek. So that opened up the voyageur express brigades, they were called, and it took them 3.5 months one way to go from the Hudson Bay all the way through the Athabasca Pass, all the way to the Oregon coast. And they would do that trip twice a year.
Wow.
Many of them drowning, getting eaten by bugs, and fights with hostiles along the way. And what a crazy, crazy life. And that was the fur trade that came right through this area. And I think a lot of local folks are blissfully unaware that this was that major trade route on the Athabasca River, right? Just, a few minutes away from where we're sitting right now.
And we talked before we even turned the mics on, Margaret, you guys have Voyager canoes at the museum.
Not the original ones. We have the assets of the Athabasca River Voyageur Canoe Brigade Society, which was a club in Hinton who wanted to do paddling and voyageur paddling and wound up purchasing 2 Voyageur canoes, which are about not quite as long as the Scratch. They're about 25 feet long. Wow. Their society wasn't able to continue, so they gave their assets to us at the museum, and we're not paddling around in them all the time, but it is a cool opportunity for keeping the canoes in town and also preserving. Paddling is a heritage skill, right? It's something people have been doing for a long time, and carrying it on is kind of being in touch with that part of history. So yes, we own 2 Voyageur canoes at the museum, and if people want to rent them, they just need to get in touch with the museum.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great
Let's do that this summer. Let's take one out.
It's fun.
That would be really great.
Yeah, and since we're talking about it, we're also running a courses in June. So I haven't finished the marketing yet, but it will be going out in the community. We are facilitating. A really good instructor is coming to do a weekend on Voyageur canoeing, learning how to paddle and pilot a Voyageur canoe. And then the next weekend will just be standard lake canoeing with a partner I call it a normal canoe. The official name is a tandem canoe. So if you want to get your paddling on, we have the opportunities in June.
Yeah.
Excellent.
That's cool.
Do you know the specific dates yet? Or?
Yeah, June 14th, 15th is Voyageur canoe, and June 21st, 22nd is tandem. So it's those 2 weekends.
Excellent. Yeah. And I mean, back to the timeline here, then the fur trade really kicked in with earnest here, and that's why we've got the name Jasper, because of Jasper House, which was the trading post. There were actually 2 trading posts called Jasper House. The first one was actually most likely close to the town of Brule, and the second one was built sort of between here and the town of Jasper along the river. There was also Henry House, another fur trading post, and for those who know the provincial park system, then there was Pierre Gray's trading post. He initially had one at Greg Lake, which is now Switzer Park, which most people don't know that. On the north end of Greg Lake, there was a trading post by Pierre Gray's. And then he moved further north when the Hudson Bay Company shut down. And, of course, we have Pierre Gray's Provincial Park now, and you can still go and see the remnants of that trading post there and some grave sites. It's quite something, and to think that was sort of the main place to get your axe and your musket and your trade your furs, really quite something. The other big milestone, the Overlanders. And I always think this is the craziest story. And so we've got the Overlander town site here.
Yeah.
And the brewery at the Overlander. And so the Overlanders came through the Yellowhead Pass in 1862. They were looking for gold in the Caribou region. And they came with 150 men, women, and children, all hoping to get gold, with 97 carts, most of them pulled by oxen, some by horses, and a herd of cows, which is ridiculous.
Wow.
And
well, there weren't any bison anymore.
There weren't any bison. Yeah, exactly.
Got to bring them with you.
And they hit disaster point. So if you've ever driven that's where you've got to slow down 70 kilometers an hour because the bighorn sheep are right down by the river. So that big cliff used to run right into the river. And they tried to get around it twice and couldn't do it. So they actually went over Disaster Point, and I've rock climbed up there. It's steep. So they're trying to drag men, women, and children and carts and cattle over that disaster point. They had a few mishaps along the way. And I mean, the big story of the Overlanders, I don't think anybody got rich on gold. Most of them, ended up dispersing. There was a lot of starvation, drowning, and it was a big disaster as far as I know. That's the
impression I've gotten. It was one of those maybe misguided ventures, but it's one of the things people seem to get into. Yeah. Traveling for gold. Refresh my memory. You say women and children. Wasn't it woman and children? There was just one woman on that trip.
Is that right?
Am I right?
Oh, okay. I thought it was multiple women.
I think it was just Catherine Schubert and her 5 kids.
Oh,
plus the one she was carrying.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking into that for another heritage project, because she has a bit of a claim to fame of being one of the first European women to cross the Rockies. And then when they arrived in Kamloops, she had her baby a couple days later, which was, I believe, one of the first Euro-Canadian babies born in British Columbia. The thing that hit me, though, about that is sometimes when you're studying history, you look up how old people were, and often in this era, the only photograph of a person is when they're older. So in your head, they're always, 60, 70 years old. Catherine was 28 when she did this trip. She had 4 kids.
Amazing.
And with her husband, who was only in his mid to late 30s, and all these other people, they're young people off on an adventure. Maybe it was a better choice than staying in boring old Ontario, Manitoba. They got to make their own way, do what they wanted. I think the Schuberts did quite well once they settled in central BC. They were storekeeper, merchant type people.
Yeah, well, the gold rush always had a way of getting people fired up, right? But what's cool about this Overlander route is people mountain bike the Overlander Trail. Yeah. Not realizing they're biking. That's where you are. The trail that was used by the Overlanders.
Why are they calling them Overlanders? Just they don't have...
They went overland. Because the other way to get to the Caribou was to take the... to ship around the bottom of South America, come up the west coast, and then that was actually the easier route. Yeah. But going overland was probably cheaper.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Some people did it by sea, which would have been a very long route indeed.
Yeah. Don't go in a gold rush, everyone. That's
it usually ends up bad, rushes. Right? Usually ends up bad.
But what if you strike big, though?
But what if?
Yeah. The what if, yeah. And then... I'm almost done here on these timeline milestones, but the railway came through around 1913 or 12, 11, somewhere there.
Yeah, the original railway surveys were in the 1870s, but then they didn't make it through till 1911 to 1915.
And the reason there's multiple dates is this is really bizarre. There was a competition between the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway against the Canadian Northern Railway. So instead of working together, all the lives lost all the timber, all the work and steel, they were racing against each other. I mean, it's like something on Hell on Wheels. If you've ever seen that show, it's just unbelievable, the politics. And so even now, if you go through the sand dunes at Brule and Jasper, you can find old railway ties and steel and those telegraph posts and that sort of thing. And there were dueling railways going through this area, which is, it just blows my mind.
It is.
I wonder
Why
if that
have
made
one
it-
when you can have two?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that made it happen faster though? Because they're like, okay, we're battling against these guys, rather than like there's no pressure if you're doing it on your own.
That's a great question. In the case of the one railway, it did make it go faster.
Yeah.
Because the Grand Trunk Pacific finished first, and then the Canadian Northern used the Grand Trunk Pacific to haul all their supplies. So it only took them a year.
Yeah.
They must have been better at it, you know?
Yeah.
But if competition actually makes it go faster, I'd have to think about that. The Canadian Northern had made Edmonton by 1905, and then they got hung up in government paperwork and investors and didn't make it through for another 10 years. So, is it the competition that speeds people on, or is it the red tape that slows people down?
Yeah. And, again, we don't realize this when we're driving through Jasper on the highway there, but a lot of what we're driving on is the old railway bed.
Oh, really?
And Disaster Point, that was blasted out for the railway. So you can start looking at the land with a very different lens once you've sort of learned your local history. And lastly, I'll end my bit here, but then we entered the era of the coal mining and forestry and the outfitters, which continue to this day, right?
Yeah.
This whole area is known for that. But there were coal mines right in what is here the town of Hinton. There was a coal mine explosion. As far as I know, there's still coal mine shafts under this town close to the Happy Creek Estates there.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and Happy
yeah.
Creek was named this. I always love this because we have a homebrew club called the Happy Creek Homebrewers. Happy Creek was named because it was a moonshine creek where people were brewing moonshine on that little creek back in the bush. So that's kind of fun.
I like it.
Anyway, I thought it's important to kind of paint a picture of this timeline, the milestones of this really unique area. And I just think it's great that Margaret's here and we have this Northern Rockies museum that can tell these stories. And you folks have archives as well, right? That people can dig into, or is that through
We have
the
a little
library?
bit.
Yeah.
The museum is run by the Hinton Historical Society. That's the official charity that we work under. And they've been a going concern for a long time. They've had their current iteration for 20 years, but before that, in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, there was something called the Hinton Historical Foundation. So there's a really strong history in this town of people, doing oral histories, collecting books, putting together tours, and which is a great legacy to build on. Those archives, there's the Coal Branch Archives at the library. We're not officially an archives. Museums and archives are different, but I do have some old papers, photos that we're looking after because they're part of our collection. We can't just get rid of them. We wouldn't. So I have some stuff that people can look at. The library has more. And then there's also Hinton material in the Provincial Archives in Edmonton and the Glenbow Archives at the University of Calgary. And then even that coal mine history is connected to Edson as well, right? So the Edson Museum has archives. Jasper Museum archives are incredible. There's a really strong history of history preservation in our area, which we're lucky to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While we're talking about museums, the podcast question of the week was, what has been your favorite museum to visit? I'll let you guys think of that one for a sec, because we got a few good answers in. Dawson City Museum, Royal Tyrrell Museum down in Drumheller. Love seeing all the dinosaurs. Someone wrote in Northern Rockies Museum, their
That's
favorite.
so nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
Jeff wrote in the Rams, so the Royal Alberta Museum. That one's pretty cool too. They have like the big.
They have a mammoth.
Yeah, they got the mammoth down there. Yeah. Canadian Museum of History. That's one out in Ontario I had to look up. And the Algonquin Park Logging Museum, which are all. That one's in Ontario.
One sounds cool.
Yeah. I would be interested in checking that one out. Do you guys have a favorite? Do you have one that like you're...
I mean, how can you pick a favorite? Off the top of my head, for the subject of the podcast, though, the Canadian Canoe Museum is like the largest collection of canoes in the world or something. It's in Peterborough, Ontario, and it is so cool. When I was there, they have a new museum now. They built a new building. I was there for the old one, and it was this incredible walk through geography and history. And, you know, you're just reminded that everywhere in this country, people have been building canoes, and they have them. You know, you learn about the cedar dugout canoe that's 30 feet long, made out of a cedar tree, and then there's one right there for you to look at. So that one's worth a trip.
Yeah, cool.
You got one on your list, Scott?
You know, the Royal Tyrrell is pretty mind-blowing, right? With the dinosaurs and the full skeletons there. It just blows your mind. I actually, I'm old enough to have a very checkered past, and I worked 9 years with science centers and museums, actually.
Oh, cool.
And I flew around all over the States and saw some of the biggest science centers. I worked with exhibit design and programming for years, and so I've a good chunk of my life was devoted to that sort of thing. So I saw some pretty amazing science centers and museums in the States that, I mean, just blow your mind. They're way bigger than any science center you'll see in Toronto or Vancouver. But yeah, I think it's great that we have these places where people can come and learn about history and science, biology and archaeology, paleontology.
Do you guys trade exhibits with other museums? Is that something like you go to a museum and you're like, oh, that's cool, can we bring it to ours? Is that how it works? Or
in a way, yes. There's different levels. So, for instance, with the museums in our immediate region, say the museum in Edmundsburg, I could definitely do that. Oh, we have a museum on loan from Yellowhead County, an exhibit on loan from Yellowhead County right now. Cool. And so that's very casual. The avalanche exhibit we had this winter, I had to pay for that through a Canadian exhibit funding program. And so the Revelstoke Museum that made it is actually making money off of sending this gorgeous exhibit around Western Canada. And when it gets bigger than that, the Canadian Museum of History, that beautiful big museum in Ottawa, does have a traveling exhibit program. So if I can get the money, I can get whatever I want from them.
Cool.
Shipping's expensive for these.
That's a really good museum. Oh,
it's so interesting. Museums... They operate on levels because these huge, beautiful, glamorous museums are incredible experiences to visit. But also, so many people will testify that going to a little tiny museum that's just run by volunteers that has the heart and the stories of a town, that's actually just as good. It's apples and oranges. They're two different things, but I guess they're out there to accomplish a similar purpose.
That's a good point. You know, I was in Saskatchewan for a while, and I visited a museum on this old guy's farm. There's this old farmer, and I don't know how much of this stuff is legal, but anyway, he had this shed of all the flint knapping, arrowheads, spear points, axe handles, axe heads. I shouldn't be saying this. He had a human skull in there, all sorts of stuff he found on his land, just plowing the fields, you know. But talk about a mind-blowing experience, and this guy had stories behind every one of these things. It made me wonder how many people across Canada, you know, have these treasures, probably many of them illegal, shoe boxes under their bed and this sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, you're right. It doesn't have to be a big, full-scale museum to be interesting.
To do something, yeah. Where the stories live it's everywhere, in the shoeboxes under the beds or in the big, beautiful museums. I learned recently that the world's largest private silver collection is in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. 3,000 pieces of silver art in Weyburn.
Wow. That's bizarre. Well, we talked before on this podcast about the Gopher Museum. I've only seen pictures. Have you gone?
Oh, yeah.
That's Torrington.
Oh, tell us about it.
It's just, that's a one-of-a-kind experience, the Torrington Gopher Museum. That's an interesting one, because then you get into definitions of museums. I think because the Torrington Gopher Museum doesn't actually serve an educational purpose. So is it a museum? But boy, is it fun. Boy, is it fun.
More of a curiosity shop, probably.
Yeah, and I know that the people who run it are also doing work to become more of their town's museum, to actually work more with their town's history besides setting up adorable gopher dioramas. They have a new one about firefighters. It's wildland firefighter gophers in the Gopher Museum. I can't recommend the
I've gotta
gopher.
go.
I can't recommend
I've
it
gotta
enough.
go.
It's amazing. Also, the drive out into Torrington through the Knee Hills is gorgeous. That's really nice country.
Yeah.
Do you have a museum on the bucket list that you haven't been to yet that you're like, I gotta go, like maybe even something out of country?
I do for sure. I have to think. Do you have one, Scott?
On the bucket list?
museum?
Well, the Gopher Museum. I gotta go. Yeah.
Yeah, my buddy goes to it yearly. And every time he goes, he sends me a picture. He's like, oh, we're back there again.
It's worth it. I think within country, I've never been to the Canadian War Museum, which is the counterpart to the Canadian History Museum. Again, huge, gorgeous history of Canadian military activity.
Yeah.
There's also the Western Development Museum in Saskatoon, which is just all about farming. You know what? That sounds fun. I've still never been to the British Museum, though, in London, or the Victoria and Albert. Like, these are the huge flagship museums of the world. So if I get overseas again, that's where I'm headed.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I kind of have a nostalgia for museums because I'm old enough to be here when we didn't have books on some of this stuff, and we didn't have internet for sure. And me and my buddy, I grew up in the Black Forest in Germany. So we were trying to learn bushcraft and wilderness survival. We would hitchhike because we had no license. Everybody hitchhiked everywhere. We'd hitchhike to Switzerland to go to their museum, take photographs of handmade bows from the Amazon and North America, spear points, basket weaving, all of this stuff. And then we'd go back to the bush and try to replicate it. So that, I mean, to me, those were, places of learning, right?
Yeah. That's cool.
Think about that. You didn't have books on it.
Yeah.
You didn't have an internet to look it up. You couldn't Google this.
You can't order a book. There might have been a book on it, but you couldn't find it.
Yeah, and we were just kids. We were just teenagers. How are we going to learn this stuff? And we learned a lot just by going to museums and looking at real stuff that was made from other indigenous tribes. So, yeah, kind of
that's really interesting.
An interesting history.
Well, and also, but the history of learning has, if we think about it, has changed so much in the past.
Yeah.
Even 2 decades.
Oh yeah. Take away Google, and how are you going to find things, right?
I think I've forgotten at this point. Honestly, I do remember. It's back there somewhere.
Microfilm.
Microfilm's amazing. Sorry.
We do have a couple would you rather questions too. You got one of those two lined up, Scott?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, let's get in. I feel like I know the answer to this one already from you guys, but okay. So would you rather travel 200 years into the past or 200 years into the future? Margaret?
I take these questions too seriously because I'm like, in the
what we're looking
past,
for.
I'll be cold. In the future, I won't know what's happening. So probably the past, O to B, so 200 years ago is 1825. Yeah, to be in, let's say, this country and climb a hill. And all you see is the land, and there's no light pollution. And the people you meet are the people who, as we've talked about, had the map of Canada in their head and under their feet. I'd do that.
Yeah.
Hopefully we won't be the 51st state.
Yeah.
Not if David Thompson has anything to do with it.
I was laying in bed thinking of this last night too, because I was like trying to figure that out. I'm like, I do think I'd want to go the past. But let's say you could take the knowledge you have now into the past. Do you think you'd be able to like teach people things back then? Like from what you know now?
I'm not sure what I'd be trying to teach them. Like basic, literacy perhaps, but if it comes to the basics of staying alive, they're going to be teaching me for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I know that people have said, like, if you could go back in time, could you prove you were from the future?
Yeah. Well, that's what I was thinking.
That's a really good question.
And most of us couldn't because, and I probably include myself there, like I can't build a radio from scratch or a watch or a GPS or a satellite. I could describe these things and they just think I'm a complete wacko. But what could you actually do to prove that you know something that they don't? Yeah. You'd be so dependent on their technology. Yeah. And you're like, no, we know stuff. Yeah. I just don't know how to do any of it, right?
I have a lighter in my pocket. I
swear it works. I feel like it'd be easier for someone from the past to prove they're from the past because you know that there was something different about them for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Like Ishi. Have you heard of Ishi stepping out of the bush in California? He was like
No.
the last indigenous tribesman. There's actually a book written about him. And he was a Stone Age indigenous person, stepped out of the bush in California, and the museums took him in and studied him and watched him build bows and arrows. And it was like the two different worlds collided. Anyway, that's...
He must have been awfully lonely.
Oh, very. Yeah, sad. His whole tribe
really
his whole tribe was gone. He was the last remaining.
So you going to the past then too, Scott?
I think I got to go to the past. Yeah. The future, I hate to be so pessimistic. Maybe I'm watching too much news nowadays, but
200 years.
Oh man.
I'm not sure if our minds are meant to handle the future. We can handle the past. So I like to tell stories.
Yeah, we can handle the past. There's something romantic, especially in the northern Rockies, about being back here on a horse with a musket and eating moose meat. I mean, that's pretty much what I do anyway, every day.
You are living in the past.
I am living in the past.
You're making a bow right now, too.
Yeah.
Okay, I got one more. Would you rather join... I had Lewis and Clark, but after you started knocking Lewis and Clark, I scratched that.
Oh, they're still pretty cool. They just don't stack up to David Thompson.
They're very cool. It's just they're doing something very different.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So would you rather join David Thompson or the Apollo 11 team?
Okay, how did Apollo 11 end again?
Apollo 11...
they went to the moon. It's Apollo 13 that had the problems.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So you're on the moon.
With Buzz Aldrin, the funny one?
Neil Armstrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think I got to go to the moon.
Yeah.
That's just wild.
Yeah. Huh. I thought for sure you'd say David Thompson. All right. Cool.
Well, the thing is he can hike Athabasca Pass this summer if he wants.
Yeah. I can do the David Thompson thing, but I can't get to the moon.
Right. Margaret?
Yeah, okay, it depends which David Thompson expedition. The Athabasca Pass one, no, it was -30 the whole time. It was not a fun time. I think actually the moon the moon.
Yeah.
That sounds
okay.
So this proves we all believe there was a real moon landing.
We do.
No conspiracy theorists here. Oh, crazy.
What's yours, Scott?
Okay, I got a good one, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Would you rather join the overlanders? Again, that's 150 people on the way to the Caribou looking for gold in 1862 and all the terrible things that happened
all the bugs,
to them.
all the mud, all the starvation,
The
all the drowning,
starvation,
broken limbs,
You're really
falling
selling
off
it.
cliffs,
Being
and
pregnant.
really selling it. So you're joining them,
Yeah.
or you join the Voyageur Express brigades in the fur trade, and you're paddling from the Hudson Bay to the Oregon coast and back.
You're paddling 18 hours a day. You get up 1 a.m.
Yep.
You smoke a lot. You drink a lot.
You sing
eat
a lot.
You sing a lot.
You don't live to be very old.
You get hernias.
You get hernias. You get eaten by bugs. You get shot at. Grizzly bears. There's no life jackets. You're in the rapids.
You got a girl in every town.
Yeah.
And George Simpson, the head of the Hudson's Bay Company, is yelling at you all the time.
Huh. But the Overlander, there's only one girl on the trip.
And she's married.
She's married and she's got 4 kids and
she's
pregnant. Yeah.
I saw George's eyebrows go up. I think you sold them on the Voyageurs.
I think I would love the Voyageur.
The thing is the Voyageurs are documented as having fun, and I don't think the Overlanders are.
Yeah.
There was no fun.
There was no fun. That might be an exaggeration, but doesn't sound like it.
So you're going Voyageurs, George?
Can I Voyager out and then Overlander back? Does it work that
Actually,
way?
the Voyageur thing does have some overland component because you have to pick up your horses in Jasper and you hike over the Athabasca Pass to like Valemount. And then you get back in the canoes.
You are hiking parts of it.
I'm Voyagering.
And you're also dragging this damn canoe against the stream.
Yeah.
But you were the toughest guy around.
Yeah.
It's true.
That's right.
Everyone cheers for you when you show up at the town with
Yeah,
or
they
they shoot
do,
you.
actually.
Or they shoot you. One or the other.
Yeah, I'm going Voyager. Sure. Yeah.
The Voyageurs like their lives. The writings we have of them. I mean, not all, but there's like a tradition of them saying, my life is the best. I liked being a Voyageur.
I think so. Lots of adventure. Yeah, I've got to go Voyageurs as well.
I think their culture involved. It was like who could be the happiest, who could enjoy it the most.
Yeah. Short life, but man, you're living it to the full.
Why short life?
Hernias.
Hernias going. Yeah.
Their portages, the expectation was every man carry 90 kilograms.
Wow.
The kilograms.
Yeah.
These guys, and also this is neither of you can actually be Voyageurs because you're too tall.
Too tall, yeah.
For the canoes, the average height of a Voyageur is 5'2".
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's short.
Short and strong.
Yeah. You going Voyageur then, Margaret, or are you
I
going?
guess so.
Okay.
Although, yeah, I can be voyageur, or rather, traveling with voyageur. Women are allowed to be voyageurs.
They weren't allowed, or they were?
No.
No.
But they could travel along. David Thompson's expedition started out with 4 women along. Nobody really knows. They didn't go all the way over the past. They bailed out with their husbands at some point along the way, but they were there.
Huh. Yeah. I mean, it makes you think, like, back then, I mean, we talked about it a few times here. It's like, you're not living for comfort. Like, there's never, like, you show up somewhere and, like, I'll just relax and lay back on the couch. It's like, okay, now I got to chop some wood, and then I got to make a fire, and then I got to build my shack, and then on to the next spot. Like, there's never a break.
No. And if you get sick, I mean, you're toast. Like, what are they going to do? It's not like, hey, guys, sorry, we got to wait here for 2 weeks while I get better. They're like...
They leave you. You might get left behind with somebody else.
Yeah, they'll leave you behind with a little chunk of jerky and hope for the best. I think actually reading about Jasper House, they left a guy at Talbot Lake by himself one winter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he had to survive on his own ice fishing Talbot Lake for whitefish and pike. And I mean, think how bitter cold and windy it is. Like, I go winter camping a lot, probably more than most people listening to this podcast. And after a few days winter camping, I'm like, I need a hot bath and a warm bed. But imagine you never...
That's not an option.
And you don't even have food. Like, oh, man. Yeah, these people were tough.
I'm reading this book now. I think it's called Over the Mountain. But it's about, like, a couple guys. They went and they're in, like, Bella Coola, BC. And this is, like, 1930s, I think it was, and they're trying to set up like a cattle ranch and everything, and they're talking about, like, it was minus 60 to one night, so they had these 2 giant fires, and they're just walking between the 2 with the horses because the horses were, like, freezing up and stuff.
Oh,
like,
my goodness.
That is brutal.
Crazy. I was like, man.
And there's no sleep. You're just staying alive.
Yeah, you're just trying to move to keep moving, and
jeez,
it makes you just think that, like, man, we got it pretty easy nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is, like, I think something that the museum can really demonstrate is, like, you go and check out, like, some of the things that have happened in the past. Oh, okay, that maybe makes you appreciate what you have now a little more than you did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's the plan for the summer, Margaret? What do you got going on at the museum?
What do we have going on? We get a fair... the teachers in Hinton are really supportive and bring their classes for field trips. And we have field trip programs for every grade.
Oh, cool.
Really fun.
Yeah.
So May and June should be busy with that. Then we get... tourists every day, all summer. So we focus a lot on just giving people great tours and introducing them to how this incredible landscape they're visiting has a history that they can find and connect with. And we like to see locals. A lot of people pop in, or they bring people who are visiting them from out of town. We go to community events. We'll be at Canada Day. We've been at Parks Days the past few years.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how the summer goes by, because people in our area really like to just get out of town in the summer. I don't try and get them to, I don't plan museum events a lot because, if it's a nice day, people don't want to stay in town, and I get that. So we focus on just looking after the people who come in, doing our school groups, and then working on projects to improve our tour and our exhibits before the summer's over.
And you guys are working on that cool railway car that's been there for a while. What's the plan with that?
That one it's hard to plan too specifically because it's difficult to get the amount of money it would take to renovate that, and even the amount of labor. So we kind of just go bit by bit. If somebody shows up who's got an idea and a bit of time and a bit of supplies, well, then we'll do a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there, and kind of let it take care of itself.
Huh. Do you think it'll be more of an exhibit that you can walk through, or a cafe for tea and coffee, or what's the vision?
I think the general vision is that about half of it would be restored so that, you can walk through it. It's got that old school look. It might have a space for, like, other displays, like if we have art, or if somebody wants to do an art pop-up shop or rent it to do something involving food. They can just have it be kind of multi-purpose and accessible to the public. And then the other half we could have as a shop or a storage room, or just, work on one half at a time. The thing's pretty big.
Yeah.
Cool.
So the general vision is that, half of it would be usable for people to look at or rent or use.
If someone's living in Hinton, or even, like, maybe coming into Hinton, how can people help you out?
Oh, how can they help us out? Well, so many ways. Come and visit. and say hi and learn about us and spread the word.
Yeah.
If you want to give your time, we are a nonprofit, so volunteering is very easy. And I like to work with people to volunteer in a way that fulfills them. Like, you want to work on the train car? Sure. You want to work with archives? Sure. You want to build an exhibit? Sure.
Cool.
Finding ways to give people something to do, develop their talents. Because we're a charity, there's also the financial component. People can buy memberships all the way to the corporate level or donate money to us. Or shop at the gift shop even. Come to the gift shop if you need a present for someone. So that's kind of the three pieces. Like, give us yourself, come in, say hi, spread the word, bring your friends. If you want to give us your time, we're always happy to meet people who want to volunteer. And if you have money to share, we'll take that too.
Cool.
We do have a very nice gift shop, and we like to showcase local artists, as many as are interested as well. So it's worth a look.
You'll have to get your book in there, Scott.
I want his book so bad.
Absolutely. This fall.
Scott's book coming out.
Yeah.
NorthernRockiersMuseum.com. You can go
us.
check that out online. You guys got an Instagram too, Northern Rockies Museum. Anything else you guys want to touch on before we shut her down?
Not for me. That was great fun.
Cool.
I love reminiscing about the past, and
yeah,
great to have you here.
It was lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on, Margaret. It was great.
It's great to share about the history of this area because it's buried in the landscape that we love.
Yeah.
If you like the outdoors, you're also connecting with this history, and there's so many historic sites in our area. So I hope everybody gets to discover a new one this year.
Love
Absolutely.
it. At Northern Rockies Bushcraft, you can follow along with Scott. Scott, post some pictures of that bow. We want to see the progress of it coming along there.
Yeah, and I was working on a quiver made from a beaver pelt today, so I think I might post that.
Wow.
Stitched with
Stuffed
some deer
beaver,
rawhide.
and you just jam the arrows into his open mouth. Is that the...
Cute.
Yeah.
Follow along with Scott. He's always on those adventures. And then as summer's coming up, I don't even know if we touched on this, but Margaret, you said you got a foraging.
Yeah, the marketing is going to come out for that, but I had communicated with the blacksmithing instructor who's come to town 2 years in a row now to come for a third year in May. I think it's the last weekend. I think it's the weekend after the long weekend. I still have to touch base with him though.
That could be fun.
Yeah. Keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. And then if you're listening to this podcast and you want to leave us a review, that'd be great. Wherever you're listening, fire us off an email if you have questions for Ask Scott, or even if you have like a good would you rather you want to submit. wildernesswave@outlook.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wilderness Wavelength.